I literally did not know what some of these vets were going to say on the Memorial Day following the March 2003 start of the Iraq War, and I admit to a considerable amount of, let's call it, mild dread. Hello and welcome to episode 63 of the BandWagon podcast for the week of June 16th, 2025. On this edition of the program, news and notes from the band world, including a story that's a callback to Mr. Holland's Opus, an Emmy Award for a band documentary, a bit of shameless self-promotion, and my major topic for the episode, when difficult things happen to good bands. I'm your host, Rob Hammerton. Hello, dear listener. Strap in. This one's exciting, and I'm not even talking about the Emmy Award. Let's just say that sometimes social media is an exciting place. You'll just have to keep listening to determine where you think the needle on my sarcasm meter is pointing. So, pull the brim of your Shako down to eye level, and away we go. Let's play the first strain. In this episode's first strain, news and notes from the band world. Dateline, West Omaha, Nebraska. Credit on this story to the writing and reporting of Tejas Reeder of the Millard North High School student newspaper and Bella Carakta of station WOWT in Omaha. Millard North High School band director Ryan Plashek will retire at the end of this school year after 13 years at the school and a total of 33 years teaching choir and band in Nebraska's Johnson Brock, Plattsmouth, Bellevue East, and Millard North school districts. Earlier this month, about 100 of Plashek's former students converged on Millard North, coming from as far away as Colorado and New York, to offer him a retirement send-off in the form of a performance of an original composition by former student Andrew Barber. The piece, commissioned by Barb Mock, a longtime friend of Plashek's, was entitled Why We See the Sunrise, and was intended as an ode to Plashek's impact on his students. The concert was reminiscent of the closing scenes of the 1995 movie Mr. Holland's Opus, except that Plashek wasn't losing his job, but instead retiring. So, a truly happy ending. That was a little bit of editorializing about a defenseless movie. Dateline, New York, New York. Credit on this story to the writing of Stephen J. Gaither of HBCU Game Day. A group of students has won an Emmy Award for their documentary The Hidden Sport, which celebrates the Southern University Human Jukebox Marching Band. The Emmy was awarded at the 45th Annual Sports Emmy Awards in New York City on May 20th. The film, by Southern University students Lauren Sullivan, Verban Mohammed, Sidney Coulier, Ashley Lovelace, and Eric White, was produced with the assistance of a national $40,000 HBCU sports broadcasting grant, won through a competition sponsored by the Coca-Cola Company and the Foundation of the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences. The students plan to use part of the grant funds to support scholarships and enhance resources for the Human Jukebox media team. And that's news and notes from the band world. If you have a news item you think should be included in this segment, send me a link via email to heybandwagon@yahoo.com. Now we'll take a quick water break and meet you on the other side. Hope you'll stay with me. Okay, let's pick it up at the second strain. In this episode's second strain, an apology from me. What's he talking about? It's possible that some of my listenership, the ones who are connected with me on Facebook, may have spotted this moment of, shall we say, perhaps getting too far out over my skis. If you didn't see it, whether or not you were in a position to see it, here's an overview. Sometime in the middle of the last week of May, I saw a photograph of the United States Marine Band, the President's Own, a photo which was taken while the band was carrying out their Memorial Day responsibilities at Arlington National Cemetery. I posted it on social media with a tiny caption that suggested that their body language was communicating something. In this case, long story short, something perhaps other than the letter of the law mission of the Marine Band organization. Famously, candid still photography is nearly never a friend to any of us. I don't really look like most of the pictures that have been taken of me, of that I'm sure. And the depiction of one instant in time may well not be reflective of a photographic subject's internal monologue. How long has the term resting bitch face been in existence again? So anyway, I posted that photo and the accompanying supposition, and inside my head, I reveled in the exercise of my First Amendment rights. Rah, rah, rah. Because this was social media, a reply came my way. It was not from a troll. It was not a harangue. It was from someone who knows a thing or two about a Marine Band thing or two. It suggested that I might have been a little bit out over my skis in ascribing thoughts to Marine Band members based on one still photograph. The word disrespectful was invoked. I paused, broke out in a bit of a sweat, and considered how, or if, to respond. After all, back in November, I conducted an interview with Alex Gardy, a member of the Marine Band's percussion section. If you heard that interview here on the podcast, you heard a gentleman representing his organization with all the class in the world. What you didn't get to hear was my interaction with the Marine Band's media relations chief, which was also an entirely enjoyable process. She made it so, and made it clear that her job, and by extension Alex's job as an interviewee, was to make sure the Marine Band was represented as professionally as possible, and also by extension to make sure that the interview was similarly reflective of that. I was pleased that they felt it did, and that it didn't take hardly any editing at all on my part to make it so. I did, therefore, have a moment of, not wishing to cast aspersions on this organization that I'd been afforded the opportunity to get a closer look at. After all, that closer look had been nothing but impressive. Because during that interview process and last week's social media moment, I was given cause and opportunity to reflect on a couple of truths. First, as the president's own, they play for presidents, the good ones and the lesser ones alike. It's their gig. And if you go back to my interview with Alex Gardy, you will not be able to discern his take on political matters. You won't be able to tell whether he's a lefty or a righty or what. Because when he's representing the U.S. Marine Band, that is not a consideration. And in fact, while I was conducting that interview, yes, I was trying to listen between the lines, as it were, to see if I could get a sense about where he stood on things. And I couldn't. Don't ask me, because I don't know. Alex was very good at that part of his job as well. The other thing I was given cause to reflect upon was this. The president's own has spent a good deal of its existence being caught between rocks and hard places. Case in point from earlier this spring, the cancellation of its Equity Arc concert in response to a presidential executive order. If they're enjoying a presidential speech, they cannot show it. If they are not enjoying it, they cannot show it. And in that way, I think it's fair to say that, yeah, I got out over my skis. So, in the comment section, I posted a quick thought, born out of the thought process that I've just described to you, and also because I thought perhaps I wanted to get out ahead of someone else's potential inspiration to get me in hot water with the Defense Department, or certainly with the President's own. As the owner and operator of a band podcast, one would prefer to be on decent terms with, arguably, the premier military band in the world. One just would. So I wrote this, quote, "I believe you are correct. I have overstepped. I spent quite a bit of time interacting with members of the President's Own back in November, i.e. conducting an interview with one of its percussionists and its media relations chief, and in this case should have better retained the dominant impression that they professed and demonstrated, which was that the organization carries out its responsibilities to the letter and with class and dignity. Back then, I worked hard to make sure my media posting reflected that understanding. Today, I did not. I apologize." And as the great Anna Russell said in the midst of her comic breakdown of Wagner's Ring opera cycle, "You'd think that would be the end of it, wouldn't you?" Not quite. Shortly after all that, other band friends and acquaintances of mine checked in. Some of them said that they thought I was actually not being disrespectful and echoed my appreciation of the challenging position that military bands worldwide have been placed into down through history. Some of them defended what they had seen for a long time as my respectful nature as a person and expressed unhappiness that that characteristic was being called into question. Can't say I didn't appreciate that, no matter the circumstances. Some of them pointed toward the content of the President's remarks during that ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery, and I did worry that we were about to move into the whataboutism portion of the online back and forth. All of the people who weighed in a forum which has become famous for knee-jerk reactions and general utter nastiness, displayed neither of those, at least to my eye. All of the people who weighed in were band people of my acquaintance from various different eras of my band experience. This is not the first time that social media has been good at providing that time travel-y Venn diagram circle intersection opportunity. A couple of the replies to the original commenter were not taken well, and while that's not necessarily a fault of the original commenter, it is another thing about all this that I do regret, while at the same time recognizing that we are living in a historical moment that lends itself to flying off the handle, or at least impassioned responses to things, and to saying things or phrasing things in ways we might not if we were in person. Such is the danger of social media, nothing we haven't experienced. At least to my eye, in this exchange, the replies that went back and forth didn't look like the Twitter trolls who quite freely engage in profanity and ad hominem attacks and really poor spelling and grammar and invitations to do physiologically difficult things. None of this will necessarily prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that all band people can conduct themselves civilly on social media. My heavens, check in on a high school band competition discussion forum and you'll be disabused of that absolute 100% universal notion. Whew. We still can't agree on whether we should still be using G bugles and marching timpani during the summer drum corps season. But given my understandable immediate worry that this comment thread could have devolved into name-calling and other far worse unpleasantness than actually went on, as the deck officer who's about to go off duty says, I am relieved. And I am in the midst of grasping both sides of this question, if you'll forgive the phrase. In another not unrelated arena discussion, I am adamant that both sides do not behave equally badly. But this is not that kind of podcast. On the one hand, the President's Own has a job to do and strict policies of behavior to follow, and the latter can make the former harder, especially if, in a particular moment or in general, a hypothetical president behaves in a way that individual members of the organization in their private thoughts, or even the organization itself, cannot support because that behavior is in conflict with those strict policies of behavior. And those hypothetical precedents have existed almost all the way back to the early days of our republic. And the President's Own, since its inception, has been in the metaphorical line of fire and has been asked to metaphorically not return fire. And my post probably didn't properly account for that, and therefore may have placed the President's Own in an undeserved, unbidden, poor light, against which, thanks to military protocol, the President's Own and its membership are not allowed to defend themselves, in person or in comment sections. So I apologize. Anyway, as a postscript, one thing I can say for sure is this, and folks who have followed me on the social medias as far back as, say, the year of our Lord 2011 will back me up on this. This exchange wasn't nearly as awful and unfriendly and uncivil and out of bounds and disrespectful as the one that ensued after I expressed an online opinion about a certain soprano prodigy. If you know, you know. And if you don't know, you might be better off. All right, let's observe a grand pause, and I'll do a little more penance over here. And on the other side of that break, a few further thoughts about this topic, thoughts that have been inspired by further events. Hope you'll stick around. Okay, let's modulate to a related key and get into the trio section. This week in the trio section, okay, so that kerfuffle happened. I'm not going to dwell on it any further, at least not that social media moment specifically. But the Memorial Day parades and commemorations of last month and the Independence Day festivities of next month, as well as Flag Day and Veterans Day, remain as they always have been, an opportunity for various brands of internal monologues, an intriguing mix of feelings at many moments in American history. Some years, it has indeed been rah, 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 land of the free, home of the brave. Famously, right after moments like the 9/11 terrorist attacks, any even mildly patriotic holiday has been a little bit of America, heck yeah, or at least a little bit of standing up for your country. At other times, for a few or some or many people, the speeches and fireworks and parades and other sundry elements have been accompanied by, as I say, internal monologues that have begun with, yeah, but. I would judge that no military conflict in which the United States has participated, let's limit the time frame on that to in the last 100 years or so, has been 100% supported by the entire American population, even World War II early on. And good intentions aside, at no time in its history has the United States been a perfect union. It's even enshrined in the preamble to the Constitution.
We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide...
Thanks to some of the foundations upon which our country was constructed, which include a whole lot of 18th century isms that persist 2.5 centuries later, we are indeed the owners and operators of, at best, a very imperfect union. Anybody who is aware of any of that might be forgiven for turning something of a yeah, but sort of eye toward the speechifying and such that pervades a holiday like Memorial Day. As a former band director, and as a current participant in holiday parades, and as a longtime observer of bands in parades and at patriotic holiday ceremonies, I have lived in that world. When I marched in the elementary school band of which I spoke back in episode 62, and then in the middle school and high school bands of my hometown, for at least most of those 9 Memorial Day parades, I sat on the cemetery hillside or stood at parade rest and listened to the speeches through the ears of a little kid who had been taught about what Memorial Day was supposed to mean, without a whole lot of understanding at that point of the complexity of viewing those proceedings through the lens of mid- and late 20th century American foreign policy. The Cold War was raging, I was 10 and 12 and 15, and, well, thus and therefore. When I directed the band at Uxbridge High School, we participated in an annual Memorial Day assembly held on the Friday morning before the Memorial Day weekend, which involved speeches by a group of Uxbridge residents who were also veterans of the various U.S. military branches, who were nicknamed the Flying Squadron. I love this story, in that they were not all from the Air Force or all aviators of some kind, though some were. Instead, their job that morning was to speak at the high school assembly, and then at the middle school assembly, and then at the elementary school assembly, and the scheduled times for those 3 first thing in the morning assemblies were nearly right on top of each other. So over the years, they had discovered that in order to be on time for the second and third ones, they had to figuratively fly from one school to the next. In this group were veterans of World War II, the Korean War, Vietnam, and the First Gulf War. I first taught in Uxbridge in the 1999 to 2000 school year, and for the first couple of those Memorial Days, it was business as usual, the standard combination of rah-rah military and also honoring those who paid the ultimate price, that sort of thing. After the 9/11 attacks, for a couple of years, it got almost uncomfortably America right or wrong. But my band kids did a nice job of keeping their faces, as always, neutral while we were visible and in uniform. Then the Iraq War began, controversially, and as Memorial Day 2003 approached, I genuinely wondered what that Flying Squadron assembly was going to be like. There were a number of my band kids who were very politically aware, shout out to their history and social studies teachers, and they had been very vocally opposed to the American military involvement in the Middle East at that moment. I held the same pre-assembly conversation with my band folks that I had always done. In uniform, we expressed no opinion either way, whether in terms of body language or facial expression, and polite applause at the end of a veteran's speech will be appropriate. The speeches that day startled me, and in a good way. I literally did not know what some of these vets were going to say on the Memorial Day following the March 2003 start of the Iraq War, and I admit to a considerable amount of, let's call it, mild dread. But those vets, to a person, expressed thoughts that suggested, quietly but firmly, that we honor the memory of our fallen soldiers, even when we don't agree with the reasons they went to war. As problematic as the defense of "I was only following orders" can be, they didn't make the policy. They didn't decide why they were going to war. They just went. I was not expecting that, for various reasons, but that's what I heard that day, and at the next couple of Memorial Day assemblies. And in the context of this week's second strain, I would point out that those Flying Squadron members were all retired military. No active duty personnel in the room. So the restrictions, codified or traditional, about active duty personnel expressing those sorts of opinions, or any really, seemed not to apply. They were free to speak, and they did so, but with restraint and using language that seemed very carefully crafted to allow them to say what they felt they needed to say, respectfully but sincerely. I was impressed. Anyway, before then, and since then, I've watched bands containing friends and colleagues of mine march in presidential inaugurations. As you may recall me speaking about previously, I got to participate in one of those inaugurations with UMass. And again, not absolutely all of the members of any of those bands were supporters of the guy who was being inaugurated. Statistically, it can't happen. And we all recognize, I think, the curious attempt that inaugural parades make to emphasize that this is a national celebration, all the while looking very much like a celebration of one guy and his running mate. And trust me, in that situation, participating bands are generally instructed that the attention position and parade rest never include any, shall we say, non-neutral facial expressions or body language or vocalizations. If it's good enough for the President's own and the bands of the other U.S. military branches, we civilian musicians should be able to handle that too. In this moment, I am also reminded of a story I heard about a college band of my acquaintance this past school year. The leadership of the particular university in question had not exactly responded to a springtime campus demonstration in the most compassionate way, and the head of the university had been taking it on the chin in terms of public relations and public comment for a couple of months. Graduating seniors at commencement were expressive. Just before the freshman convocation at the beginning of the following school year, that was this past fall, the student leaders of that college band took a moment to gently but firmly remind the rest of the membership that as soon as they entered that basketball arena for the convocation, their single job was to be members of a band that was representing its university. You are in uniform. Your actions will be seen as official actions of the band. Therefore, you will cheer for your university, no matter what you think of its leaders right now, and you will do nothing else. The band's job is not to express a political opinion one way or the other today. For the record, they followed that game plan to the letter. I'm not surprised. I believe the applicable starred thoughts include this one. There are standards of behavior, standards of how to project the image of the band, which is the image of the university, which is, of course, the image of themselves. All of these are examples of bands being caught between rocks and hard places. But these situations have been commonplace since approximately the dawn of time. Here's where it gets interesting from a current events standpoint. I mean, an event that occurred very recently. Not terribly long after that second strain social media back and forth that I had, which had been inspired by my Facebook post, over the Facebook messaging app I was sent a link to a video posted by an online current events commentator which got my attention, as the sender of the link intended. I've lightly edited the transcription of that video. You can follow a link in the show notes to the original video post, but it said mainly this, quote, "Military representatives are now going on record to tell us that they are being asked to do things they shouldn't have to do. The current presidential administration announced that they will not only be strictly enforcing Section 88 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, but expanding it. Section 88 deals with contempt toward officials, which in civilian terms means commissioned officers are prohibited from using contemptuous words against certain officials. That includes the president, vice president, Congress, other high-ranking officials. The military is being told that if they speak out against the president, his cabinet members, or anyone in an official capacity, not only on duty but off duty, in person, on social media, or anywhere else, they will be prosecuted under Section 88, which can include dismissal, forfeiture of pay and allowances, confinement. So, the current administration is moving forward to deny our military officers their First Amendment right to free speech, to dissent, to assemble." Unquote. The commentator's post mentioned some other changes that were being made to U.S. military policies, but that was the one that got my attention in this band context. There are larger implications to these policy changes, including but not limited to new enlistment requirements and their potential effects on what the military will look like in the future from the larger and more thunderous perspective of whether the military will be full of people who will perhaps not possess the kind of critical thinking skills that would help them to determine for themselves inside their own heads what's an unlawful order and what's not. Obviously, if you're worried about the membership of the President's Own, or Pershing's Own, or the Coast Guard Band, or the Airmen of Note getting in hot water by being in violation of a new interpretation of Section 88, I wouldn't lose sleep over them. They've had lots of experience, centuries worth, in fact, with maintaining the old poker face during public appearances and while on duty, carrying out their responsibilities as military personnel. It is, of course, the new potential prohibitions on maintaining that actual or metaphorical poker face during any other time, any other interaction, in person or online, during their off hours, that get my attention. Big Brother is now watching, I guess. Rock, meet hard place. Again. But in a new way, and in a way which is not reassuring whatsoever. We've always been at war with East Asia. After this brief break, more Bandwagon. Here comes the dogfight. This week's dogfight is unusual in that it is not a faintly humorous thing or a band-related internet rabbit hole of the week per se, but instead it's a continuation of a previous topic and a tiny bit of commentary, which usually goes in the second strain, I know, but, well, as they say in field conducting and music theory, you're only allowed to break the rules once you've mastered them. In this case, well, let's just say I've had to rewrite and re-record segments of this episode no fewer than 4 times. I know, first world problems. But I'm starting to get the idea of how the producer of a weekly news analysis program feels in these days of breaking news about every 7 minutes. Seems like you're always playing catch-up, like current events will conspire to make whatever you publish or broadcast just slightly out of date, and therefore more of a quaint historical document. Wasn't it cute when we only thought this was true? This past week, when I thought this episode was in its final form, with the addition of a new trio section, which you have just heard, I thought to myself, there. That will be the one time in all of Bandwagon where I do a deep dive into the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Check that box. And the universe overheard that thought and said to me, not so fast. Everything comes in threes, wise guy. This past Tuesday saw an event that is not strictly band-related. In fact, none of the details of the event itself are even band-adjacent, unless you suppose that the people involved have been near military bands at some recent time. It was last Tuesday's appearance and speech by the President at Fort Bragg, the U.S. Army base located in Fayetteville, North Carolina. That base is the headquarters for the U.S. Army Special Operations Command. Highly trained units like the Green Berets and the 82nd Airborne are based there. Credit, on this portion of the story, to the reporting and writing of Konstantin Toropin and Steve Banin from the online outlet military.com. Quote, "It was supposed to be a routine appearance, a visit from the Commander-in-Chief to rally the troops, boost morale, and celebrate the Army's 250th birthday week, which culminates with a Washington, D.C. parade slated for Saturday. Instead, what unfolded Tuesday at Fort Bragg bore little resemblance to the customary visit from a President and Defense Secretary. There, President Donald Trump unleashed a speech laced with partisan invective, goading jeers from a crowd of soldiers positioned behind his podium, blurring the long-standing and sacrosanct line between the military and partisan politics. As Trump viciously attacked his perceived political foes, he whipped up boos from the gathered troops, directed at California leaders, including Governor Gavin Newsom and Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass, amid the president's controversial move to deploy the National Guard and Marines against protesters in Los Angeles, as well as former President Joe Biden and the press. The soldiers roared with laughter and applauded Trump's diatribe in a shocking and rare public display of troops taking part in naked political partisanship." Unquote. The military.com story also dealt with other issues surrounding that day's events, including the apparent violation of Pentagon policies on political activity in uniform, a tightly orchestrated effort to curate the optics of the president's visit, including the hand-picking of soldiers for the audience based on political leanings and physical appearance, and the sale of Trump campaign merchandise on the base. One commander at Fort Bragg told the military.com writers on condition of anonymity in order to avoid retaliation, and that's not unnerving at all, quote, "This has been a bad week for the Army, for anyone who cares about us being a neutral institution. This was shameful. I don't expect anything to come out of it, but I hope maybe we can learn from it long term." Unquote. Other experts were quick to come out and say that the public silence from military leadership is a missed opportunity to reinforce the military's nonpartisan nature. Meanwhile, the political leadership at the head of the Defense Department was far from apologetic. According to the military.com writers, President Trump is hardly the first commander-in-chief to use U.S. troops as a backdrop for a speech with some political elements to it, but many of those past examples were presidents choosing the setting to speak to the troops about military policy and issues that affected them personally, and with the exceptions of polite applause and laughs at presidential jokes, troops have not been especially vocal or reactive to the rhetoric being offered. But experts say that Trump's speech, which overtly treated the event with Fort Bragg troops in the audience as a campaign rally, and which overtly and directly criticized his opponents, crossed a line and showed that the military's ethics can be vulnerable. I haven't seen any indications that any military bands were on the grounds for the event, or at least not for the speech itself. It might be my inherent band bias, which leads me to trust the leadership and membership of military bands, and indeed band personnel everywhere, to maintain discipline, to hold to the tenets of public in-uniform, on-duty good behavior, even in the presence of, shall we say, offbeat speeches and presentations, that causes me to have a hard time imagining a military band joining in with the jeers and laughter of the Fort Bragg soldiers in that audience. Even as I am still recovering from having posted something online that called that discipline into question. Remember that second strain? Yeah, I still do. But as I saw photos and video clips of the Fort Bragg spectacle from last Tuesday, all I could think of, having already written and produced this episode's trio section, was this. Section 88 wept. I'll return in a moment to wrap things up for this week with a slightly less frown-inducing item, I promise. Thank you for continuing to listen, and I mean that. To wrap up this week, let's take the CODA. From time to time on this podcast, and more fully during a December interview with my friend Greg Smith, I have opened the door a crack and given you a bit of a peek at the community band that it's been my good fortune and pleasure to be associated with since the summer of 2022, namely the Nashoba Valley Concert Band. I played with them for the second half of 2022, and then, happily, after a short audition process, I was pleased to be named their conductor, following in the footsteps of the great John Blackwell, who had served as conductor of the Nashoba Valley Band for 20 years. I quickly grasped that the band's schedule is largely weekly rehearsals from mid-January to mid-December, and includes summer and early fall concertizing, as well as concerts and caroling gigs during the December holidays. That's our year. What that means for someone in my shoes is that for a solid 5.5 months, to start every calendar year, we're doing nothing but prep and repertoire. Until about late April, we all come to rehearsal without the pressure of an imminent performance opportunity. Not that we don't enjoy the performance element of our band life, no indeed, but most of my experience with bands has not had that relatively luxurious stretch of time to try out pieces, see which ones work, see which ones we like, and which ones don't hit us so squarely. The school bands that I've played in or led have always had a concert or a halftime or whatever coming at us like a freight train. That was especially true when I got to graduate school and was an actual music major. I had not experienced a non-football band that scheduled more than one performance per semester, pretty much. So when I got to Boston University and sat myself down in its wind ensemble with Malcolm Rowell on the podium, I realized, a concert in mid-October and then another in December. There may even have been 3. And after my niece headed off to college with her oboe and her violin tucked under her arm, it seemed like every month there was another email coming through about a concert-going opportunity. Perhaps my undergraduate non-major concert band activity did not properly prepare me for the ferocious repertoire-building pace that most collegiate music major-heavy ensembles keep up. I might be the last person on earth to have come to that understanding. Anyway, the Nashoba Valley Band has been kicking around its usual slate of repertoire, 25 or 30 pieces of various styles and intensity levels. Although after our president and librarian and I had our annual repertoire pickin' session, I did notice that for some reason, or possibly for no good reason, our picks seemed very classical heavy. So we've done a bit of work to add some more backbeat-laden items. And we'll put up many of those at an event on Friday evening, June 27th, in Shirley, Massachusetts, which is off of Route 2 in north-central Massachusetts, not too far from where Fort Devens used to be, and not very far at all from our band's rehearsal location. Oh look, there's the shameless self-promotion right there. The town of Shirley runs a summer concert series every year, and it features rock bands and pop bands and folk bands, and us. According to all the research I've been able to do, the Nashoba Valley Band is the only featured act where no instruments get plugged in. We are the single large ensemble on this weekly summer concert series slate. If you feel so inclined and you're in the area, just pop 41 Brown Road, Shirley, Shirley, into your GPS and venture out into the woods, it's a very rural setting, for a bit of evening music. We'll start at 6:30 and go until 8 or until the light isn't that good. Again, we're kind of surrounded by trees. Based on the past 4.5 months of work, we think you will perhaps enjoy it. Maybe you'll feel inspired to want to join the group too. Hey, Wednesday nights, 7 to 9, but that might be a lot to hope for. Which doesn't keep me from hoping. That's BandWagon for this week. Thanks as always for downloading and listening. BandWagon was written, researched, and produced by your humble host. Musical interludes were produced by Hammerton Media, from source material largely by John Philip Sousa. You can listen to more episodes at the pod's website, heyband.podbean.com. Please give me feedback. Let me know what you like or what you think might change. You can do that using the email address heybandwagon@yahoo.com, or you can leave a 90-second voice message by going to speakpipe.com/heybandwagon. Be aware that I do reserve the right to include your message on the podcast unless you say otherwise. Those contact links and links to this week's news items and conversation topics can be found in our show notes, as can a link to BandWagon's merch store, thanks to the good folks at TeePublic, who are running a sale between today, June 16th, and the 23rd. You got a whole week. Speaking of shameless self-promotion, please share the show on social media, and thank you for that. If you enjoy this podcast, please do share it in the direction of someone whom you think might not be a listener yet. Word of mouth really is the best recruiting tool. And to keep up with the pod, subscribe to BandWagon on the Podbean app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever fine podcasts are sold. For now, take care, stay in touch, stay in tune, and we'll do this all again in a fortnight. I'm Rob Hammerton, and remember, starred thought, never assume anything.